Yeah, so thanks, folks, for joining the call today. This initial discussion, followed by the ones that we're going to plan based on your needs over the next few weeks and months, really have stemmed from some questions that Jocelyn and I have had that we've discussed with Sandy around why is it that um, testing isn't being done as much as we would like using Touchstone and doing the fire test scripts and doing validation. And so I spoke to a number of our members and found out that there was some misunderstanding about what was available to members around Touchstone and around validation, as well as some miscommunication or misunderstanding of the value of this testing. And what came out of this was a conversation with Sandy, and this request to Sandy that we're going to do today is to help you all understand what's available to you as Vinci members around Touchstone, number one. And then number two is why this testing is so important and should be useful to you as you are developing your applications, your platforms, your APIs, both as kind of end user and stakeholders, as well as if you are a vendor, because we understand it, the vendors being asked by their customers, well, how do I know that your platform complies with all these IGs? So the goal with this is to kind of reorient everyone to the value and the use of Touchstone and the fact that we have a partnership and a contract with Aegis to make this available to our member community, and how to help you, if you haven't already, kind of jumpstart your efforts around Touchstones, that we can use it more both at Connectathons and between Connectathons. So thank you. I'll hand it back to you, Sandy.
Awesome. Thanks, Viet. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm from Aegis. I help run the Connectathons for HL7 under contract and also lead the healthcare interoperability team for Aegis. And so today I'm going to walk you through sort of why fire validation is so important, how it's going to help you meet those regulatory requirements, but also why validation and testing are really two different things. I'm a huge believer in Connectathons. I've been doing Connectathon type work for over 10 years now, but also we really need to help you understand and appreciate why this validation using the fire specifications sort of built-in tools is so important. Then I'm going to talk to you about Touchstone, the test platform that Vinci has contracted us to provide to Vinci and all of its members. There is a fantastic value proposition for this tool for your organization to use it, but also the value proposition to Vinci as a major HL7 fire accelerator. And they're really pioneering this thing, right? And so we need your help to make sure that those Vinci IGs are as strong as they can possibly be. And then I'm gonna walk you through sort of the steps to get you started in Touchstone, just at a very high level. There are other members of my team who are far better at technical demos, and we certainly will link you to those resources at the end of this. So first, why is this so important? I'm sure that you have all seen this slide, the ominous interoperability rule timeline to meet these requirements for CMS, and all of these implementation guides that Vinci has built fit right in line with this interoperability rule timeline, right? So there are requirements coming up in July of 2021 and more over the next couple of years. So it's really important that we get this right, both the IG development process as well as the implementation of those IGs. There are a lot of challenges with fire implementation, folks. And if you've been working with it, you know that this is a complex platform specification. And I think a lot of organizations thought if I participate in Vinci and just implement according to the IG, it should be relatively straightforward. But what you'll find is that as a platform specification, it usually requires some adaptation to the implementation context. So elements that may be, required as part of the base spec, or added on top of those requirements for the base spec, things around terminology services. And sometimes there's even overlapping sets of adaptations that you have to pay attention to according to the IG requirements or what domain you're working in. So having enough staff hours to turn all of your developers into fire experts is nearly impossible these days. There's just too much going on. Another challenge is that extending fire to meet your business requirements can be just tough from an organizational perspective. So we want you to be able to support your business requirements, even if you have to extend an IG or build your own profiles in conjunction with the Da Vinci implementation guides. I've heard so many people say they're going off and building their own profiles without maybe making sure that that overlap with the Da Vinci IGs isn't there. So as you do that and you have these additional business requirements, it's important that they become part of your test plan, and they really need to be included in test scripts that are run by all of the systems in your ecosystem being deployed. The next challenge can be that many of you are relying on third-party systems, and as you know, the fire spec alone can leave gaps for interpretation. We've got this set of Da Vinci IGs that is really solid, and we need your help to make them better. But also, we want to make sure that we're doing the negative testing and doing the deep testing against conformance to ensure that your systems are all going to work together. And then finally, multiple projects across large organizations. I know for a lot of you who are from larger payer organizations, it's really tough when you get into development versus procurement and departmental separation of your API deployments. And sometimes your integration testing loses sight of conformance to the spec. And so that's why these IGs are here. That's why these test scripts are here for you to use. So we have great news for you, Da Vinci implementers. These, so the implementation guides line up directly, as I said, with the CMS interoperability rules that are developed and vetted by your own community. So these implementation guides build in constraints to ensure that data meets the healthcare requirements as you move forward. That's what they're here for, and the test scripts are going to help you meet these requirements. The third-party vendors are ready to get you started with out-of-the-box solutions. So many of you may be vendors that are helping these communities, and if you can significantly accelerate your implementation with something like a Happy or one of these out-of-the-box solutions, but you still need to vet your implementation of that system to make sure that you're conformant. The next piece of good news is that ensuring that your validation stays conformant to the CMS interoperability rules is really not that hard when you have the right tools. And Da Vinci had this in mind. Viet and Jocelyn, we talked about this a couple of years ago when they started developing these IGs, that we want to make sure that you have the tools to adopt these IGs in a conformant manner so that you'll create true interoperability. The Aegis Touchstone platform is designed to help you meet the implementation requirements and any additional requirements that you may have in your ecosystem. This in-depth validation of conformance to the standard for the actual instance of your implementation is the only way really to ensure your system is enjoying the intended benefits of interoperability and of FHIR ultimately. So I want to talk to you about peer-to-peer testing, which is what we do at the Connectathons. Again, I'm a huge supporter of Connectathons of all varieties, and I just think there is a ton of value that comes out of networking and running tests against your peers. But peer-to-peer testing can also fall short. When we were working with point-to-point interfaces, the industry norm for testing was, go to an IHE Connectathon, test with 3 different partners, vet that your system is working with each of those 3 different partners. And if it does, and we all say it's good, then you can walk away and say, we've implemented that implementation guide. But in reality, when we look at how we've transitioned to APIs, it really only vets those single use cases of those APIs. You're testing at a Connectathon with a few partners, but you're not validating against the specification or ensuring interoperability if you've only validated those 2 systems. It also really depends on human interaction. So what have you missed? If you're doing just positive or happy path testing and no negative testing, it's really hard to tell just from some audit logs what you may have missed. So this peer-to-peer testing is a challenge because it does not ensure compliance to the interoperability rules or the fire implementation guides that you all have worked so hard to build and support. But more good news, Fire has built into the specification a testing framework. If you're not familiar with the test script resource and the testing resource, I want to share with you that these are built-in test methodologies for the Fire specification that can be used to validate interoperability across Fire server and client implementations. So the Fire test script resource basically is a standardized process for documenting the steps in a test, whatever test assertions you may have for your scenario, so that you can execute it using the Fire testing resource, which is the process that is standard to automate running of those test scripts against a prescribed workflow. And that's how you make sure that you're meeting the requirements of both Fire and the Fire implementation guides. So these test scripts support evaluation of all of your operations and your rules, all of your asserts that come into play when you're talking about your implementation guides and their scenarios. Now, I'd be remiss to not mention capability statements. And of course, those are the computable description of how a system works. Very helpful in the process and a great foundational indicator of interoperability success. But the difference between validating a capability statement and validating the test script that's been written against the test script resource is that the capability statements are not inclusive of all parameters of system behavior. So it's really important that you get down to this level of detail that the test scripts define. And I think some of you who have used Touchstone to validate have realized, like, wow, that's a much more significant level of detail than what we've been looking at before. And so this framework is not really set up to, pass or fail people so much as it's set up to make sure that as you're developing your code, you're getting it right. And as you're developing a reference implementation, let's say, you're able to identify the gaps that are in the implementation guide. And we've successfully done that several times over, which is why you've seen changes in implementation guides as we go. So this process is called test-driven development. And basically, this is the process to code a little, test a little, design a little bit more. And so basically, you build really small unit tests, and then you write just enough code to pass the test, and then you refactor the code until it conforms with what you're trying to test, and then you repeat that process until you pass the test, and then you build a little bit more on. And the benefits of test-driven development can be huge. Significant reductions in defect rates. Really, it's a small incremental cost to pay up front to be able to, in terms of time, to run those tests in order to improve your development. And teams that use test-driven development and do this early frequent testing with TDD report that it saves time and money, but also that it can lead to a significant improvement in the technical quality and improve metrics of cohesion and coupling, for example. So next is that it simplifies Fire for QA teams. So many quality assurance teams aren't deep Fire gurus, right? They just need to know that things are passing. And so this process provides base Fire tests and workflow tests for Fire IGs to meet whatever requirements you're putting out there. And it provides really detailed and immediate feedback on Fire implementations. And so I'm going to show you how Touchstone does that in just a moment for those of you who haven't seen, because I think it's really important to realize that feedback is what you're after. Again, it's not the pass fail, it's the feedback you get into that coding process so that you can ensure that there's no surprises when you go to release a new product or a version of something, right? So just to reiterate, Touchstone is completely free for your use. You can go out to touchstone.com and set up an account, and there are instructional videos on how to do that on the Vinci Implementer Confluence pages, and we are also happy to help you with that if you run into any troubles. But one of the great things about Touchstone is that it supports peer-to-peer validation. So if you're doing that type of of peer-to-peer testing during the connectathons, which I know many of you are, you can actually just use Touchstone as an intermediary. You go into the test setup screen and basically just select what systems you're testing, and then you enter whatever variable. So in this case, it's a valid patient resource ID on your server, and then you would select execute. So it's pretty simple to set this up. And then the test execution screen appears once you run that, and it automatically refreshes as you run your tests. And then once it's complete, you can select either the test script execution hyperlink or the status hyperlink to go into those test details. So when the test execution details are displayed, you can see here, you can see exactly what tests were included in that test setup, because test setups tend to have multiple tests in them. And you can actually drill down into these tests to further introspect it by using either the test name or the status hyperlinks that appear on your screen. So it's pretty simple and straightforward to take a look at that. But check this out. The level of detail that you get when you run these tests can give you a huge amount of information on the operations and the asserts that you're running against. So any connectivity or authorization problems can be seen here in great detail, so that you can find that, or any validation errors against FHIR. Now, this particular test passed 100% successful, probably not the ideal example, but if this test had failed or partially failed, you would get great detail and know exactly where you need to go back into your code and fix it to meet the implementation guide. So use Touchstone for your test-driven development. Use it for the connectathons to make sure that you're conformant. It will do a couple of different things. One is that it's going to give sort of on-the-job training, if you will, to your developers who are using FHIR. Again, not everybody is a FHIR expert or FHIR subject matter expert, but we feel like we can teach just about anybody to build using FHIR, any developer to build using FHIR, because we give this level of detailed feedback back to you. The Touchstone platform provides thousands of base FHIR specification tests. So if you are still trying to set up those initial resources, you can get that done very quickly using this product and then move straight into testing against those Da Vinci IGs. That detailed and immediate feedback that I just showed you on your FHIR code obviously is a huge benefit. And overall, this using test-driven development and this level of rigor in your testing will lower your cost of development by identifying all of that non-conformant code before you get to any sort of formal testing or release process. So I want to talk about continuous integration testing just for a moment. This was called out directly in the CMS interoperability rule. Basically, it's a development practice where you integrate this level of testing into some sort of shared repository so that you're doing frequently, preferably several times a day, tests. And that integration is then verified by an automated build and automated test. And so we can provide this level of testing for you with the Touchstone API. And so continuous testing will most certainly ensure that you have no surprises when you get to that, that end game and you're trying to meet the rules of the implementation guide or test against some of your peers at the Connectathon or out in the wild. So continuous integration testing will provide metrics to benchmark problem patterns and trouble areas. This is a great way really to find out if there are multiple people on your team who are doing something wrong in the same way. Wouldn't you like to know about it? And this level of detailed results will show you that over time if you're testing early and often. I think that's about it, but basically we recommend continuous integration testing. We're proud that Touchstone, I think the Touchstone API is just about the only one that's available to do this level of conformance testing and definitely to test against the Da Vinci implementation guides. So this is just the quote out of the CMS 9115F, specifically states that payers implementing APIs can incorporate testing tools into a comprehensive testing plan and continuous integration system, which can automatically validate adherence to the implementation guide when changes are made and this will further mitigate the cost. And so here's the deal, folks. We have set up Touchstone as an automated test platform. We've given you an API to it so that you can use this within your ecosystem, not only to meet the implementation guide and ensure interoperability at Connectathon, but as you release your product and you upgrade your product and make any revisions you need to your product to work with various technical partners or assume new technical capabilities, having an API that will run in the background and just make sure that you're constantly conformant to the spec is really the only way that you're going to ensure true interoperability. So integrate conformance testing API into your existing processes. This will give you a 24/7 third-party validation and verification to make sure that you've got that, that conformance box checked. So this is the Touchstone results dashboard, and this is just one more feature that you have access to. And basically, what we do is we provide you the ability to publish your results to either publicly so that anyone can see it, or you can actually publish them and share a permalink with whether it be your boss or your customers or technical partners that you want to integrate with. You can demonstrate your conformance to these implementation guides by simply sharing a permalink. And this is a constantly available, particularly if the fire standard evolves, which it will, and these IGs evolve, which they will. It's really good to have this to go back to. You simply run the test and share your new results. Easy peasy. So to summarize sort of the Touchstone platform in a nutshell, and I really hope that you'll go check it out because I know I haven't done the features justice, but the open access internet-based validation of the fire specification, this is the place to do it. It teaches your people how to use fire through test-driven development, validates the capabilities of and interoperability between server and client implementations, and then it houses all those ready to run fire test scripts for implementation guide build and validation. So you don't have to build your own tests to test fire. These are all there and ready for you to go. Just to talk for a second, there is a payer certification program coming that'll be powered by Touchstone. And so this sort of gets you into that glide path. It proves compliance with the fire standard and the required use cases. There is a certification seal. It's sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval. It's provided by Drummond, who is one of the major test beds for ONC currently. And this is a good way for you to do that ongoing conformance monitoring to complement regulatory enforcement. And of course, it comes with a predictable renewal cycle to ensure that those updates are made. So for more information about that, you can go out to the Drummond Group's website. So now I want to talk to you about, these are just sort of the general benefits. I got ahead of myself. So again, to reiterate, decreasing the cost of interoperability with fire. These are sort of some of the benefits. And then again, we recommend incorporating it from the very beginning, which is why I think Da Vinci has availed this system to you. So why does Da Vinci use Touchstone? I think this is one of the things that Viet and I were discussing a few weeks ago in terms of we don't understand why people don't see the value. And so we wanted to really just share a few things for you. And one is that Touchstone gives you the opportunity to verify these reference implementations that are being used as benchmarks by the industry, right? So these have been written into legislation or interoperability rules. So we want to make sure that those reference implementations are really strong. And validation of the structured profiles. So Touchstone's upload of those IG profiles catches all those errors in the structured profiles themselves, and we're able to go back, our script writers go back to the IG authors and make sure that's all buttoned up and hopefully within the reference implementations as well. And real world testing and conformance validation brings to light issues that otherwise, as I said earlier, go unnoticed. So the other thing it does is it takes out any room for interpretation of those implementation guides. And it's just really difficult. I mean, any of us that have ever written anything technical know it's really difficult to make sure that those requirements are, bulletproof. And this is just a way to ensure that it's as close to bulletproof as we can get. So member systems running the Da Vinci test scripts help calibrate the tests and close the gaps in the implementation guides. Validation testing against those reference implementations is really going to help exercise and strengthen the reference implementations that have been provided by MITRE and others that are building Da Vinci RIs. And it's just a really good process to be able to find those holes and close them up. Da Vinci wants you to test to make sure that those systems are ready to support the next phase of fire at scale pilot testing. For those of you who, I don't know, maybe have been living under a rock and are familiar, the ONC Fire at Scale Task Force is putting together a set of requirements for scaling fire. And their goal is to pilot test leveraging these Da Vinci use cases. And so it's really important that we have run these IGs and RIs through all the cycles. And finally, it really does help create a glide path for others in the industry that maybe haven't been as engaged with Da Vinci since the beginning to meet those CMS patient access requirements. So to get started with Touchstone, again, it's super easy. Basically, like I said, it's free to all of you as Da Vinci members to use. And I'll go back there. So this is the Touchstone landing page, just to sort of walk you through this process. You go out to touchstone.com and you'll find that you can access right now, without even setting up an account to Touchstone, you can review the Touchstone documentation. And this provides a wealth of answers about how to log in, how to set up your test system, and how to use other Touchstone features. So you can use this, if you just want to check it out and you're not sure you want to set up an account yet, I mean, simply go out there and you can really find a lot of information that will help you kind of determine what your next move is. Registering for Touchstone will give you access to run tests from your system against the Da Vinci test scripts at any time. In order to run any tests, you do have to register, right? So during Connectathons, we open it up so that you can run unlimited tests. When you're an open free subscriber, you're normally limited to 5 test setup runs per day, but you can, as a Da Vinci subscriber, you have access to, I believe it's unlimited test. It's more than you could ever use. So your user ID always has to be associated with an organization, and you're going to want to think through, do I register as a Da Vinci member or do I register as my own organization? And there are pros and cons to both. So if you're within the Da Vinci organization as a Touchstone user, and when you log in, it'll prompt you to become part of an org or to create a new one. When you're within the Da Vinci organization, you will have access to unlimited testing. You will have access to upload or edit test scripts. What will also happen is that your test results will be viewable by other members of the Da Vinci organization. So this mainly is for companies that are learning fire, learning about the IGs, testing the reference implementation or other Da Vinci artifacts so that they can share the results and keep those test systems confined only to viewing by Da Vinci members. The other option is to set up your own organization. And if you're testing a commercial system or you want to keep all your testing private, using your own organization within Touchstone is definitely the way to go. And you can simply check that list. There's a drop-down list there and see if someone from your organization has already created one. And if so, you can join it. If not, then you would need to create a new organization. And so that's sort of the big difference between, when you're logging in, we get a lot of questions about this. Do I want to be part of the Da Vinci organization or external? The Da Vinci organization gives you added benefits and added visibility into those other DaVinci systems. Now, what I will say is that if you're whether you're registered as a DaVinci member or not, you can still leverage Touchstone for peer-to-peer testing between your system and the other DaVinci systems that have been made public. So once you're logged in, you can basically log in anytime you want to use Touchstone. It's up day and night, and this is one of the big benefits of using an online platform is that it's always there, always available. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to update anything as new versions come out. We update our validator. We keep our validator up and running. We have tremendous uptime. So basically, you can just run these tests and view your results against test scripts that are there and ready to go and always current anytime you want. So to register a test system and run tests, basically you have to define your test system, and then if the test system is not already there, like I was saying before, you can test against these DaVinci reference implementations. They're already defined for use within Touchstone. But if you need to add a system, you just select new system and then put in a new entry for the test system, which is pretty straightforward. So this is just an example of that test system list within Touchstone. So what I would ask is that you consider testing at Connectathon. So you can find a library of short tutorials on the DaVinci Implementer pages in the Developer Toolbox section. There's a link to it on these slides, which will be made available to you. And you can see along on the right-hand side of this slide where you see those yellow folders, you can see sort of how those test scripts are named for your use. Simply register your organization in Touchstone, find those scripts, define your endpoints, and then get this feedback on your build so you know what's what and you're ready to go and test with those other partners successfully. Another thing that's really nice is as we do demos and we're moving into Connectathons for both HL7 and the CMS Connectathon is coming up, and they're really interested in seeing who's conformant to the specification, who's using these IGs successfully. And so we want to work with you to try to give you a megaphone, I guess, for successful tests, and not even just successful tests, but just tests. Just run these tests. It will help DaVinci. It will help your product become stronger, and I think that you'll find it's a really easy tool to use. So basically at Connectathons coming up, we're going to promote in the track report out any system that has run and validated tests in Touchstone. The FHIR maturity model requires that 80% of functionality of any given IG is passed in order to move that IG through the process. So that's another good reason to help support DaVinci in getting these IGs into their most mature state within that FHIR maturity model. We will, as I said, if you register as your own system, keep your test results completely private. Nobody's going to publish your passes or fails. It's simply not necessary. What we want to do is let others know that you can validate these systems and that you are validating. And we want to let you know where you're at with your implementation in a very objective, definitive way so that you're not guessing that just because you worked with another system, you must be conformant to the IG, because we just know that's not always true. So at upcoming Connectathons, look for breakout rooms that'll be designated for DaVinci testing support. We will be there to show you to the track tests. We'll be there to help you figure out how to set your stuff up and get those that validation going. And certainly if you need help in digesting your test results or getting things going, we'll be there for that too. Always happy to get that feedback. And then, you know, if you need additional testing resources, we're there for you as well. So that's about all I had, a quick hit, but I am happy to discuss or take any questions that you may have about anything that we've talked about today. But I hope that you all will, you know, go back to your organizations and consider giving Touchstone a shot since we've made this available. I'm just now looking at the chat, so I will take a look at this now.
So this is Viet again. A couple of things that Sandy and I talked about is um, we really want to encourage you to use Touchstone. I think Sandy's done a good job of describing that it's probably not harder than you thought it was, because I've heard that some of the organizations, the developers feel like it's yet another thing they have to do, but that they didn't see the value. So hopefully you understand that there's certainly value here. The other is this first introduction may get many folks pretty far along, but there may be situations where you need a little more help. So Sandy and I have talked about scheduling some what I'm generally calling office hours for folks to drop in and ask questions. Certainly you can send emails, but if you have questions you think are generalizable and you want to have a set time, we're going to try to find a good time of the day, not that there is a good time of the day to do this, so that you can just drop in and ask questions, because sometimes a little bit of hand-holding will help. And of course, I'm thankful to Carrie and Ryan and Richard and Sandy, because they're there at the Connect-a-thons, always trying to be wandering from room to room to try and answer questions that people have as they're having them. So there are lots of opportunities to get the help you need to address your questions.
Hi, this is Scott Thompson. I have a question. I love the test-driven development approach, and a couple slides back, it looked like your test results dashboard, the output, looked a lot like the IG conformance rule set pages. Is that essentially the model for your output?
I believe so. I think that this may have been loosely based on that. Are you talking about like the initial Crucible?
I believe that's what it is. You might, if you don't mind flipping back a few
Sure.
pages. Yeah, it's the table of conformance results. But
Let me see if I can find it easier.
Sure. And the reason that I'm asking is with that test-driven development, is it possible to drive conformance in development by being red for failing and turn green for passing your touchstone results? Does that make sense from a test-driven development standpoint?
So
Having your
what you would
developers.
do is so these we call them starships or starbursts. I don't know what they're actually called, but you do have the same drill down capabilities from there. So you would want to go into some of these more.
That's what I'm talking about. This
Yeah,
chart right here, the conformance chart.
yeah, you would need to go into the more detailed test results. But we have and it's I don't have a slide for this, but under the blue bar on the left where it says test executions, you see history, and you can actually see that history for anybody within your organization, and you can see every test execution that they've done, and you can drill down into that. So if you fail one test at 9 a.m. and by noon you have that working and something else got broken because you were modifying things, you can go back and see what that is, and you can drill down to any one of those test executions at any time.
Which is kind of why that's that driving the results to go green. The other corollary to that is I know that one of the challenges is keeping up with the changing standards of the IG. Um, is the test ability of the conformance bleeding edge enough to be on a daily basis that we're conformant with the most recent version of IG as it changes?
I would say we have those tests updated for every Connect-a-thon, so that's 3 times a year. I don't know that those IGs are solidifying changes on a daily basis, right? Like, and Viet, you may be able to speak to this better, but as the IGs are changing, yes, we're working to update those test scripts, and we do try to have solid test scripts that are in line with the implementation guides for every Connect-a-thon. But some of these implementation guides are in flux, and so we make those revisions as quickly as we can.
Right. So I would say the best certainty is we try to update them all right before the Connect-a-thons, and we would want to make sure that they're updated as soon as we go to a publishing. So we want to try to use milestones that don't have you all having a moving target.
Right. That's kind of what I was curious about, was what cadence you were going for, and what cadence you were seeing them change, and if you were trying to keep pace with the change of the IG itself.
Yeah, so the challenge is IGs go through this maturation process, the pre STU1 ballot, where we're trying to work out the details that go into a ballot to validate that the I'm going to say at the lowest level, the FHIR API resource profile level, those might change a fair amount as we're trying to figure out what goes into the STU1. Once we have an STU1 ballot, that's typically where we'll have a set that goes with the ballot, and then another when we or modification or updates when we complete balloting, because the balloting process a lot can change, and it all depends on the cadence of our ballot resolution and the significance of the comments. So I think we versioned those test script sets, don't we? So that would probably be good to know.
That would be a good Carrie question.
Yeah, Karen.
I believe it's by FHIR version.
Yeah, we do. There's a history on each of the test scripts, so you can look back and you can see if it's the first version, or sometimes it's the 14th version, and really that is just dependent on how long that particular IG has been around and how many iterations of test script updates we've had to make. But we do make updates for other reasons as well. Like, for example, if someone is testing and there's a question about what's guidance in the IG meant, we can clarify that with the track leads. And I know several folks here on this call have had those discussions with folks like myself and Ryan. And then we've gone and made updates to the test based on things like clarifications about IG guidance as well. So those do get updated fairly regularly, even if it's not for a connect-a-thon, if it's for some other reason like that.
Yeah, Carrie, you make a good point. I think we should be cognizant that we have a mixed community, in the sense that we have many of you, and we appreciate your role of helping us develop the standard and test the standard. And then there's a much larger community, 98% of the rest of the community, that just wants a stable IG and associated test scripts. So for those of you who are helping us make the standard better, please continue to participate, but you also recognize that it changes somewhat. And if there are groups that are more on the conservative side who want to wait, then you may want to wait till after, get to a ballot or after it's published, because then there's more stability, I would say. Is that fair?
Yeah, I guess that's exactly what I'm speaking to, is how stable a presentation I can make to users of my endpoints. You know what I'm saying? So long as I can say, I know that with Touchstone, I can support IGs at this conformance frequency, then that's a statement by which I can move forward and say, I know that I'm always conformant to this level at this pace.
Yeah, so maybe Carrie or Sandy, we could help. Would a vendor or a stakeholder be able to provide these kind of reports to their customers or their partners to say that as of this version of these test scripts, this is our compliance or conformance, sorry.
Exactly.
And I think that would certainly be a fair thing to do, and a kind of a balance of recognition of where we are in the standard development.
Or provide the ability in your history of, as you're talking about history of changes to the test scripts, knowing that, well, this was modified because there was a level of conformance change that we did on this date, and that way it can be picked as a taggable, this is conformant as of this date kind of thing.
Yeah, actually, you make a really good point. I'm actually thinking of some of the scripts that we did in the past year or two, where the IG was still in flux. It hadn't gone through its first ballot. So every sometimes every 2 or 3 weeks, we would see that there were new and updated structure profiles for us to pull down into our validator. So those were very, depending on when we caught up with what had been uploaded, that those tests were however far behind or changing that quickly. But then, really, once we have these IGs that have gone through their ballot and they're like at 1.0, right? Those tend to be a lot more stable. And then you're looking at things like guidance changes, understanding of how to implement changes, or things like fire tickets where everyone says, yep, we all agree this is going to change. We actually, depending on what the community says, we may make that change prior to that fire ticket actually being closed out with an IG change. So that's information you would probably want to have about those particular tests, right?
Yeah, that's exactly kind of what I'm working with a payee vendor who's using our fire system. I think that they're early adopting some of our work, and they're claiming a defect against what could be just a change in difference in the IG version.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that would be fantastic to be able to say stuck to this version, conformant, and tell me otherwise, basically.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. So next I have a question. I'm going to ask Ryan Murky from the Touchstone team to answer this one. He's sort of our OAuth guru because we do support it. But the question is, does Touchstone support endpoints that are secured, such as OAuth, or is there an assumption that the endpoint you want to test is unsecured, as this is an external app hitting the plan's endpoint, which even in test environments are typically secured for internal testing?
Yeah, and so like Sandy did mention, we do support OAuth and a couple different security schemes. The only caveat is that we don't yet support peer-to-peer testing with like an OAuth security. That's on our roadmap, but it's not yet. So if you do have a secured endpoint, you're going to need to have Touchstone be the client in the interactions, but you should be able to run any test against a particular server if you just set the test system up correctly in Touchstone with the information that we need in order to do all those different OAuth handshakes.
Does that answer your question?
Sorry, this is Kevin Day. I asked the question. So yes, I was on mute. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Ryan and Carrie, for jumping in there. Are there any other questions?
I didn't want to monopolize, but I have an OAuth related question. Do you support multiple, like if we have multiple payees as third-party vendors, what about multiple endpoints with multiple OAuth schemes and authentication credentials?
You should be able to set all those up as different test systems in Touchstone. So they'll have their each the base URL like for the fire scheme, and then can you, for each one of these different test systems, you can set up a different authorization endpoint and different like client credentials if you need those. Does that answer your question? I think it does.
Yes, it does. Yeah, different test systems. Understood. Gotcha.
Perfect.
And there's no limit to that, by the way. So if you have 5 or if you have 50, you can put in as many as you want.
So this is Kevin again. So that's a follow-up to that. So can it interact with a standard Smart on Fire service? In other words, I'm doing that call and the authorization check occurred, but now it's going to go through an authentication. Like, so let's say I'm testing the patient access API, which is pretty much every plan is trying to test that right now in preparation for July. So, and the auth server will reroute that to a member authentication HTML page, right? A logon screen. So it can handle that interaction.
Yep, we can
Okay,
you can
awesome.
send the tester from our web page to the login web page at the authorization server, and then have it all redirect back, and nice and easy.
Great, thanks.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I am so glad that you came, and I'm going to turn it over. I think we're at about 5 minutes till, and so Viet, if you want to lead us out, that would be great.
Yep. If you've been on other Da Vinci calls, you've heard we're trying to leave 5. We're calling it 5 for life to give you some time to transition. Some of you, it's the end of the day, so it's transition to your 5 o'clock hour activities, but others to whatever you're working on for the rest of the afternoon. But thank you for being here. We hope that this has spurred your interest and your efforts around testing. If you have questions, Sandy has her email up there, and I'll work with her to find a time. If this works generally well for folks, this is not bad for most of us. We'll do some office hours, because the questions you've already asked, I think, are going to be generalizable questions and helpful for others as well. So thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll sign off, and reach out to us if you have any other questions. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.